all the things that ITSCI could do in the coming year, what do you, and I say this to my fellow panelists here and to members of the audience, most want to see it do? I think it should be a very interesting discussion. We're joined today by a very distinguished panel of practitioners and experts. I'm going to introduce our government participants in the order in which they joined the ITSCI initiative. Mr. Joseph Ikoli, the Secretary General of Mines for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Mr. Ivan Twagera-Shima, Chief Operating Officer of the Rwanda Mines Board. Mr. Dedas Neterampiba, General Director of Burundi's Office of Mines. Gentlemen, welcome. We're delighted to have you here today and have your governments represented. We'll also have on our panel Ms. Kay Nemo, Head of Sustainability at the International Tin Association. Welcome, Kay. Ms. Candy Owens, Chair of the TIC Supply Chain Initiative, a representative of the tantalum industry. Mr. Mikhail Dowden, Deputy Director of Mines to Market for PACT. Mr. Ben Nano, Principal at Synergy Global Consulting. Mr. Dharam Koteka from Halcyon, an international commodities trading company. And Mr. Quentin Lamarche, Specialty Metal Resources, also an international trading company. Obviously, it's a wide array of panelists from a lot of perspectives, and it'll ensure that we get a very, very interesting discussion. Panel one is a reflection on a decade of success for ITSCI and key stakeholder contributions. And Kay, I'd like to turn to you to kick off.
Thanks, Ger. I'd also like to add my welcome and say how much we're looking forward to sharing experiences with everyone online today. For those less familiar with ITSCI, I'll start with a little more background. First of all, saying that our program is a joint industry initiative of the kind that's described in the OECD guidance. That means that we work to support companies to achieve due diligence, which in turn promotes responsible sourcing of minerals from high-risk areas. Our large-scale program grew, as Guy said, from a small pilot in Eastern DRC in 2010, which was voluntarily started by the International Tin Association to address possible links between minerals, human rights abuses, and financing of armed groups. We now work with all three tin minerals on the ground in Burundi, the DRC, Rwanda, and Uganda, including with our government partners who are here today, and also are able to link those producer countries with buyers in more than 40 other countries. So it's a global supply chain initiative. So how did this all start? We need actually to go back to 2009 when the profile of conflict minerals was at its highest. The UN group of experts were reporting allegations linking companies to armed groups, but there was no real consensus on where the issues existed. It was impossible to identify a mine of origin and difficult and time-consuming for any remaining buyers to assess if their supply chain was contributing to abuses. This type of uncertainty wasn't good for business. It meant the three-tree trade was already dwindling away. And in 2010, Dodd-Frank came out and led to more de-risking, and a de facto embargo began. In 2010, the OECD multi-stakeholder process achieved a new consensus by creating the due diligence guidance. This was a turning point and provided the certainty that was needed. Our ambition was to work to find practical ways to support 3T companies using the OECD guidance. And we were pleased when in 2018, the OECD actually confirmed that our standards are 100% aligned with their expectations. It's this alignment that's really helped us and our partners and our member companies to achieve continual and progressive improvement. So other presenters today will talk obviously about their perspectives, but I can really personally say that I've seen huge progress over the years. 10 years on, formal ITSCI systems are integrated into government and business processes. Many new companies are trading and investing in the region. Several mines have been mechanized with more economic impact. Statistics are available and legally required taxes are being paid. Above all, around 80,000 miners are working who wouldn't be working if the embargo had continued, and they're working in greater security and more formally than ever before. So what lessons can we share? First of all, you must be prepared for a lot of hard work. Then make sure you're inclusive and working with all stakeholders. ITSCI had strong support from governments and companies who wanted to make things happen, but it's also important to reach out to those who might be a little bit less keen to make some changes, as well as, of course, the civil society. So to push back the embargo, we needed to identify mine sites, differentiate the extent of risks at a really very precise local level. We do this by having local staff permanently on the ground, in touch with local issues and trusted by local stakeholders. While rumours and allegations still continue every day, ITSCI provides an independent view to better support the due diligence decisions of companies. Our on-the-ground teams are essential for information gathering and risk resolution, but also provide training and a lot of other support to all the stakeholders. Operating ITSCI needs particular expertise, equipment, and also continual funding, which can be difficult to maintain. Upstream actors fund ITSCI, and we don't rely on donor support. However, this makes us vulnerable to market dynamics. Upstream companies also remain frustrated that the value of our work and improvements are not well recognized or rewarded downstream. ITSCI has actually promoted dialogue on fairer sharing of costs across the supply chain, and we're really looking forward to hearing results on the session on this on Wednesday afternoon. So just to wrap up, there's no getting away from the fact that due diligence in high-risk areas is complicated and it's difficult. But we have shown that by keeping it simple and practical, shared initiatives can really work. It is possible for upstream actors of any size to effectively implement what's needed to resolve conflict and human rights risks. And my colleagues will be sharing more with you today on how that's achieved. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Kay. Appreciate your kicking it off that way. I'd like to turn to Secretary General Ecoli to intervene from his perspective. Mr. Secretary General.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I am very happy to be associated with this session that coincides with the 10 years of implementation of the ITSCI project in our country, especially in the sub-region of the Great Lakes. This is why I wish to pay tribute to those who initiated this process. I would like to congratulate the authorities of the Republic. Their vision was clear. It allowed our supply chain to become responsible. They worked so that we could have a strong traceability system. ITRI has a long history with the ITSCI project in our country, and it dates back to 2010. The first protocol concluded with ITRI was on the 2nd of June 2010, and the first traceability process started in our country that same month, in June 2010. More specifically, this was in the mining sites in the province of South Kivu. This was the beginning of a great adventure, which then affected the whole sub-region of the Great Lakes. In June 2010, we began the process, and indeed, the process did properly start. In June 2010, something important happened in the United States. The promulgation of the Dodd-Frank Act, something which many of you are aware of. This completely changed our environment, especially in our country, and this American Act really highlighted armed conflict. The situation was becoming dangerous in terms of how minerals were perceived on the international scene. They were being hit by embargoes because of the involvement of armed conflict in our country. And so in June 2010, this law was promulgated, and the head of state at the time made a decision. The decision was to suspend all mining activities in our country, at least in the 3 provinces involved in the conflict, the Maniema, the South Kivu and the North Kivu, and then from September 2010 to March 2011. This is when the traceability came in. It had begun in the mining site of Inyamibwe in June 2010, and that was suspended as well. when the suspension was no longer in effect in March 2011, following the authorization of the President of the Republic at the time, the Ministry of Mines made a decision by a letter dated the 14th of March 2011. This letter authorized the extension of activities in the provinces of the Katanga, Maniema, North Kivu, and South Kivu. This authorized these activities, and as a consequence, agreements were concluded in June 2010. The ITSKI project was then extended, and this project, which aims to implement the ITRI program, the international program that promotes labeling and traceability. And by labeling, I'm also talking about the source of the minerals. I'm talking about due diligence as well. We're talking about traceability from the mine until the point of export. Now, over 10 years, this project has been very advantageous for the country. It has improved transparency and production. And within the 3 Ts, we have received reliable production statistics, and thus transparency has improved. The ITSKI project has also promoted good governance in the mining sector, and it has strengthened the role of the government in the management of the mining sector. As I said, we were able to really get a handle of statistics, and as a snowball effect, this project helped with state resources because everything was well channeled. This project has contributed to the fight against illegal resources in terms of the 3 Ts. And this project has also contributed to fighting against fraud and mining contraband. What's very important is following the Dodd-Frank Act, our minerals have had access to the international market. This is the most significant result that have been obtained following 10 years of the implementation of this project. And so we believe this project has been very beneficial in improving the 3 Ts in our country. Unfortunately, like any project, like any human endeavor, we are sorry to note certain actions that did not meet the expectations of the mining operators in our country. Firstly, it's taken a lot of time for the companies of our country to become ITRI members. It can take 1 or even 2 years or even longer. There's a very long time period. It takes a long time to become a member. And also the levies are very high for the Democratic Republic of the Congo, despite the various agreements, the Paris agreements, and especially there's a disparity between the provinces. And finally, and for a certain time, there have been irregular evaluation meetings of this project within our country. But the fact remains, things are very positive. The ITRI processes for ITSKI are very positive in our country, and I thank you for it.
Thank you so much for those comments, Mr. Secretary General. It's very interesting, the impact on the DRC, and your joining us today is greatly appreciated by everyone. I think we're going to turn to a different perspective now. Dr. Twagira Shema is going to share his experiences as the operating officer of the Rwanda Mines Board. Please jump in, sir.
Thank you so much. I start by saying hello to everybody. Thanks for the organizers.
I'm going to start by saying hello to everyone. Je vais commencer.
Useful in terms of information shared. My talk will address three parts. The first one is just the background. Mineral traceability started in Rwanda as a response to Dodd-Frank Act 1502, where the US Congress enacted legislation that requires US Securities and Exchange Commission registrants to provide certain disclosures about the use of specified conflict minerals emanating from DRC and adjoining countries in which Rwanda was inclusive. So to avoid pending embargo, the government of Rwanda immediately signed an agreement with ITRI to implement mineral traceability and comply with all requirements of OECD guidelines, as well as Dodd-Frank Act. So there was urgency and importance of achieving the successful results of the project activity in order to maintain and promote international trade in 3Ts and other minerals. Tagging started in Rwanda on 17th December 2010 at just one site, and by end of 2011, project had covered almost 400 sites across Rwanda. It was a big challenge to start a new project without budget. By that time, we needed staff to cover 400 sites. We needed salaries, equipment, and on the top of mentioned problems, there was pressure from neighboring countries who wanted to keep trading their minerals with Rwanda. The security organs had a hard time to stop cross-border minerals, which was a short notice order from the central government. So the government of Rwanda at that time recruited 80 staff to facilitate in tagging and availed their salaries. ITRI facilitated in procurement of tag and logbooks, and the exporting companies agreed to pay a certain fee on export in order to support the government to maintain the staff. This progress would not have been possible without the effort of Rwandan Geology and Mine Authority, the ISKI team in and outside of Rwanda, and as well as the miners and companies participating in the project. Current state at the moment, mineral traceability has been adopted in national laws. It is not only adopted to comply with OECD due diligence guideline, but also as a regulatory tool to achieve mining vision and professionalization of mining sector. Tagging has played a big role as a tool used by the government for the mining companies to comply with safety, health, and environment standards. For example, if a company does not comply with mining law and standards, in Rwanda, we suspend the tags until the company comply with all requirements. Pursuant to the approval of the head of states of ICGRR of the sixth tool to curb illegal exploitation of natural resources, currently all export in Rwanda are given ICGRR certificate prior to shipment. What is next we would see in the future for ITSKI and traceability? Currently, ITRI mineral traceability program is more manual than digital, which still makes it difficult to handle issues of illegal mining, in which mineral from unknown sources might easily compromise the system. We need to migrate to digital in order to address some issues and errors, destruction of paper, especially during rainy season, or loss and theft of tags. Secondly, it is important to harmonize cross-border trading. ICGR member states still work alone in mineral business, and hence value addition is encouraged in the region. For example, Rwanda at the moment has resumed a tin smelter and gold refinery, which need material from different parts of the country. To end, due diligence costs are high and are all shifted to miners, so there should be a way forward on how cost should be shared among all stakeholders who have stake in responsible supply chain. I thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Togira Shema. It was a very interesting perspective, and we were really delighted that you were able to join us today. I'm going to turn to other panelists now. We really want to look at more broadly. You know, some of you have been with ITSKI since the beginning. Others have come on more recently. I think we're interested in seeing now what have been some of the blockers and enablers for ITSKI over the last decade. What are some of the success factors? And how have different roles contributed to the work that we've made? I think I might want to start with Candy and Durham. I think, Candy, you've been there since the very beginning. We'd welcome your perspective, both in terms of the successes and the challenges that you've encountered along the way. Please join us.
Thank you very much, Gail. Yes, well, having worked for an export company in Rwanda for 10 years and as a TIC representative, I was one of the original actors along with Kay who helped shape the OECD guidance all the way back. I personally saw the huge transition that occurred over those 10 years after the introduction of the ITSI scheme. Before the introduction of ITSE, there was a kind of Wild West attitude within the mineral mining and trading arena, from theft and bribery, extortion, human rights abuses, to minor death occurrences at mine sites due to lack of safety knowledge. After the introduction of ITSE, improvement and transformation was evident. And it meant obtaining consistent and reliable information about supply chains, and knowing that through working with ITSE, risk and human rights concerns were managed and monitored. I see the blockers as that throughout this 10-year period, ITSE faced resistance from some local actors to change in their lives. ITSE and PACT basically have fought very hard to extol the benefits of the system through a barrage of criticism over that period. But I guess that's to be expected because it shows that ITSE is effective at driving real change. Over those years, I see the enablers as being that ITSE slowly changed the prevailing attitude as the outreach programs and local multi-stakeholder meetings gradually educated the local actors from top down. ITSE made them understand that the international community would disengage from Central Africa if mining and trading practices were not improved. The previous systems of bribery from mine site along transport routes and even at the borders eventually stopped, and local miners were made to feel secure again from aggression, while safety standards in mines improved immeasurably. Do you want me to tackle the other part of the question, Ger, or just leave it at there for now?
Sure, feel free, and then maybe Durham can give some specifics after you. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think the second part was, how have different stakeholders contributed to ITSE? Right. And I can speak from the TIC perspective that the TIC was initially a bit reluctant to join ITSE as TIC had developed our own code of conduct. But it was quite soon apparent that the TIC realized the benefits of the ITSE system. And as the initial focus of the UN sanctions and Dodd-Frank Act had been focused on tantalum, it made sense that the TIC and ITSE, for them to combine our resources and our members to try and affect real change. I think this worked because ITSE is pragmatic. I think it takes a kind of big tent approach rather than an exclusive club one. It's about continuous improvement with different actors, not exclusion, which is important. And in responding to varying challenges, by combining and harmonizing effort, I think ITSE, with the support of the TIC, was able to gain consensus amongst the supply chain actors, and in doing so, create the greatest level of uptake. ITSE's success in working with industry and other associations such as TIC was to work with the supply chains and businesses, processes, rather than try and work against them or change them. And it must be stressed, obviously, that members provide financial sustainability to ITSE, and also that they have they should be recognized in coming to the table during times of difficulty. Years ago, when price difficulty, or recently with the COVID. Members are also part of progressive improvements, and through ITSE have been educated and enabled to integrate due diligence into other business processes, from supplier engagement, creation of sustainable management practices, through to understanding of public reporting requirements, which was quite a big issue at some point during the OECD in previous years. Yeah, I think those are my points. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Very helpful, and your perspective over these years is broad and appreciated. Durham, would you like to fill in a little bit on this in some detail?
Sure, thanks, Ger. So I think the most tangible aspect for over the past 10 years for the ITSE program has really been the increased awareness and willingness to comply. it has really filtered upstream and become the status quo. You will not hear people talking about trading, supplying, procuring minerals without mentioning traceability and due diligence. The structured approach towards the program, towards the due diligence, traceability, plausibility aspects, and its importance in the implementation of these measures has really taken off on the ground. The measures that are in place have allowed people on a ground level to implement them, and therefore the program has effectively achieved acceptance by the markets for Central African 3T minerals, and the resultant positive effect on local economies and the well-beings of hundreds of thousands of people. As a result, the capacity building of upstream stakeholders to the program, where they're also contributing, has been a major challenge, which we feel has now been overcome through encouraging engagement with suppliers, formal and informal training on activity and risk reporting, and the resultant effects it's had on material production, benefiting all in the supply chain. Turning slightly to the other side, a couple of challenges which I'd like to touch on, and I think has been one of which has just been previously mentioned, has been the data transmission and inscription, a challenge that we feel still needs to be worked on due to the manual labor involved in verifying logbooks, tag numbers, and other numerical activities where there can be some inscription errors. Further integration with local government authorities on the interpretation of due diligence and traceability, and not using them as a means to penalize an exporter should there be a breach, but rather working cooperatively to further better and strengthen due diligence and risk mitigation efforts through the supply chain is something that also can be improved on as a whole in our industry. Now back onto the other side again, and furthering on what Candy mentioned, broadly, if we take the activities to support due diligence and traceability and break them down into 5 parts: verification, support, risk identification, supply chain plausibility, and active engagement, each of these 5 factors really depends on a joint multi-stakeholder nature to ensure a high level of compliance in responsible mineral sourcing. And the ITSC program, through its incident reporting, monthly summaries, baseline reports, has given a platform to exporters and traders alike to better their own efforts and their own judgments without incurring the significant extra costs, which I may touch on later, that would have been in place had the program not been there. The incident reporting aspect has been particularly useful as it allows the identification of risks that may otherwise go unnoticed, whilst the on-ground presence and local expertise of packed staff has made it easier for upstream exporters to discuss any challenges along the supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Dharm. Much appreciated comments. Maybe turning to Quentin, I believe that you have an example, a study that you may want to share with the group.
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Gary, to give me the floor. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So just to give you a bit of background, so Specialty Metals Resources is an industrial and trading house that is active in mining, tunnel converting, and trading cobalt, copper, tungsten, and tantalum. So I'm myself the trader in charge of the tungsten and tantalum international trading book. And in this capacity, I oversee the controlling of the investment we made in New Bugarama Mining Company. New Bugarama Mining is a tungsten mine located in the Burera district, northern province of Rwanda, near a village called Kidao. This mine was discovered and operated since 1951. It was fully destroyed in the 90s during the terrible events that have taken place there during that time. And in 2009, Specialty Metals Resources recovered the rights on the mine and signed an MOU with the Rwandese mining authorities to create the mining operation that would operate Bugarama mining concessions. So since we took over the mine, NBM has invested in property, plant and equipment and geological studies. NBM has transformed from a rather chaotic artisanal mining operation to what we can call today a semi-industrial mining operation. NBM is coordinating and offers a safe environment to around about 7 cooperatives of artisanal miners, representing anywhere between 500 to 7 daily miners, who are all paid on bank accounts, provided with health insurance covering themselves and their own families. NBM is recurrently donating as well every year to generate local impact on education and health sectors. NBM has also successfully been able to invest in semi-industrialization while keeping a focus on safety standards for the cooperatives working on our site. today, I think we are an example of successful inclusive integration of these two type of mining approaches. So the project has been made possible due to a number of factors. One of them is obviously that around this context offers a safe bedrock for international investors. Rwanda is a country of law, and it is also a country where you can find highly qualified local individuals to manage it. So from a financial controlling point of view, up to mining operations. So there are competences and people with relevant experience in Rwanda. Now, obviously, this project could never have been possible without the ITSCI system. In 2010, somewhat later after our acquisition or recovery of the mining rights, I would say, the Dodd-Frank law was signed and NBM suffered a de facto embargo of its production, almost overnight. The OECD due diligence guidance regarding responsible minerals, which tackles the need for regional certification mechanism, was an important step for Specialty Metals to keep its commitment in this investment. This key system offered significant and sufficient capacity on the ground to perform due diligence, and it was overall meeting criteria recommended by the OECD. Then ITSCI provided a safe bedrock for international investors like us. The system enabled us to convince our long-term offtake partners, IG Western Refinery, to see our NBM mining operation, although small, as security of supply on the long term, foremost, a fully legitimate, responsible mining operation. After all these years, and taking a broader look at the industry, it is safe to say that the ITSCI system has provided enough due diligence assurance to convince international buyers now to consider the Central African Great Lake region as a region to possibly include in their purchasing plans, and this across the 3T sector. So ITSCI was definitely the first mover, but moreover, through its association with PACT, provided the capacity that is definitely needed to document the due diligence assurance process. Now, 10 years after, the system works. Like all systems, it can be improved. We firmly believe that a tech-enabled approach could help this improvement process. Maybe I'll discuss this in the second stage of this panel.
Sure. Thank you, Quentin. That's very, very interesting. Good hands-on approach. Maybe turning to Ben, you might be able to share with us a little bit about your experience with information sharing throughout the past the decade.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Benjamin Neno. I'm a principal at Synergy Global Consulting, and we've been, I think, the role of independent evaluator of the ITSCI program over the last years. So it's a pleasure to share some reflections after 10 years of program implementation. So maybe just enable me in less than a couple of minutes to share what our role has been over the last years on ITSCI. So our role, the independent evaluator's role, is threefold. We first do preliminary audits. So we do conduct those preliminary audits when the companies want to join the program. And so we do check on the shareholding and management structures. We check past issues in relation to due diligence, and we do a quick screening of the policies and systems in place before companies join, and we recommend membership. We also conduct audits on the ground. This is more a ad hoc part of our activities. They do take place at the export and trading levels. So we do control that member companies are implementing the traceability requirements, their due diligence policies, as well as checking risks in the upstream supply chain and passing the information on to downstream customers. And we do also monitor the program. So we do work regularly with PACT by reviewing incidence level, classification, time for resolution, and providing advice on possible changes and adjustments to be made. So maybe just the key message here as to our role is that we are often seen as the auditors, but our role is broader than that. Our evaluation role is more than audits. We do third-party verification of new membership, as well as ongoing third-party monitoring of PACT work on the ground, which is really the operational leg of ITSCI. So maybe now just a few words on the key progresses that were made over the last years and that we've been noticing as an independent evaluator. So obviously I'll keep my evaluator's hat in this context and won't talk about many other issues that others have touched on in this panel. So maybe first at the company's level, I think supporting what's been said already, I think there is a huge increase in awareness and improvements in that regard. I think it's fair to say that companies understand much better what the international standards are and traceability requirements as well. And so particularly exporters, due diligence is much more formalized than it was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. This is true in terms of policies, systems that now exist, and companies are more aware of the tools and the different incidents and their role in the program implementation. So I think this is a positive improvement to be noted. Maybe at the operational level, what we can say is that there's been less and less incidents on issues regarding traceability. I think this is obviously still an ongoing concern, but I can say that things have been, incidents have been reducing over time. And maybe the additional point is about the consistency of incidents reporting. There's been a more rigorous follow-up in terms of multi-stakeholders consultation and resolution of incidents, as well as risk mitigation more broadly. So these are definitely two big improvements that one must note after 10 years of implementation. Maybe just a few words also with my evaluator hat in terms of challenges that remain to be addressed. So one thing that I'd like to emphasize on is that apart from a couple of exceptions, there is a critical lack of implication from the downstream sector. And I can say that because after so many years working with the program, we've never been really asked, except maybe in a couple of exceptions, about information that are produced as part of this program or as part of our audits. So I think that questions the use that the downstream sector makes of upstream due diligence information, and maybe asks, questions whether if downstream were to do more due diligence on the upstream, they would possibly see more value and be able to make a better use of the information produced. I think that brings a wider important limitation as to the fact that about the impact that the upstream due diligence can have, and the visibility that downstream actors can have on the upstream risks. Also in terms of the deepening and broadening of due diligence in the upstream that could be made. And also perhaps beyond, I think this also reduces, that kind of undermines some of the efforts that are made, and somehow one could say that we maybe are not challenged enough on our work in the upstream sector by some downstream actors on everything that is made. So yeah, these were the few insights that I wanted to share.
Thank you very much, Ben. Much appreciated. Michaela, Ben mentioned several times a couple references to on the ground. And as we all know, where the rubber really hits the road is on the ground and where these things are done. Perhaps you can share some of your experiences on the ground with the panel.
Thanks very much, Garen, and hi to everyone. So yeah, I'd like to give the perspective from our on-the-ground teams who are deployed in 4 countries. And I'll start by mentioning some key successes that we've seen over the years. First, the key point is to say that today ITSC is operating at scale, and that even in very remote areas, disregarding the size of mines, disregarding the number of miners working at those mines. So among the around 2,000 sites that we monitor, some require more than 2 days trip to reach by motorcycles, by foot, sometimes by boat for half a day or a day. But it is important for us to include these mines because we don't want to let any miners behind and give them the opportunity to have access to market. ITSCI and then the on-the-ground teams have proven their success in playing a role as facilitator and mediator in, for instance, disputes between companies and local communities or among cooperatives. And this is key for companies to secure their social license to operate. It's also key to avoid companies, to avoid the suspension of activities on mine site, which at the end of the day would penalize all parties, both companies and mining communities who rely on daily incomes. So we avoid this suspension while pending issues can be dealt with in an appropriate forum with the appropriate authorities. With regard to the involvement of local multi-stakeholder committees, which have been mentioned a couple of times by my previous panelist members, we have great successes. I can name one example in Chabunda territory, for instance, in South Kivu province, where upon the initiative of the committee, ITSCI field staff now participates in a weekly radio program to sensitize miners about responsible mining. We've shown success in resolving conflicts, and we need to remind ourselves that the program has been developed to address conflict issues on the ground. And when we look at North and South Kivu province, for instance, we've seen local authorities and the local multi-stakeholder committees who have been involved in meeting with armed groups leaders, including with the support from ITSCI teams, and achieved the demobilization and surrender of such armed groups leaders. And that particular example demonstrates how local committees members took ownership of ITSCI mechanism and processes. It also shows, and that's very important to me, and this is some feedback that we collect from on-the-ground actors, how ITSCI has been contributing to restoring peace on the ground. Another success I'd like to mention, it has been mentioned already, but I will emphasize it once again, is that stakeholders are agreeing to the key principle of transparent reporting of incidents that occur along the supply chain. And this is key to discuss and agree on mitigation measures and to bring the confidence for the market to remain engaged. And that's the core piece if you want this program to work. I'll just close that comment by mentioning a few challenges or blockers. Obviously, there are still security issues and challenges in some areas. If we look at, for instance, some territory like Lubero territory in North Kivu province, where there are still various armed groups present and they prevent from creating a good economic climate for mining activities to take place, leading miners to look for other opportunities and not engage in mining. Another challenge is the ongoing need for capacity building training. And this is important because being on the ground, we do see all the changes related to, for instance, the rotation or the replacement of local stakeholders, including state technical services, local authorities, state security forces. And therefore, new people need new training if we want to reduce risks, in particular, for instance, with new military being, or new police being deployed and with little or no knowledge of due diligence. And last but not least, another challenge I can mention, which still remain, but which require specific interventions, for instance, child labor. We've seen great improvements and action taken by local stakeholders in reducing children from mine by raising awareness of minors, setting up local monitoring groups at the sites involving cooperatives, state services, school directors as well. And this has brought some important success, but it is not sufficient, and we need to address the root causes of child labor, which will need broader interventions. It's an important point to make because this will go beyond ITSCI's core mandate and capacity, and especially when, as Benjamin mentioned, when funding mostly relies on the upstream sector, and we've seen a lack of engagement from the downstream sector. And I'll stop my first intervention here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mikhail, and thanks to everyone on panel one. That was terrific, and we squeezed everybody in on time. Thank you for being respectful of each other. We're going to step back now for the audience. We have a surprise. We have some voices from the field, a tape to share with you. This was not on the agenda, so it's kind of an added bonus. Roper, do you want to play it? And then we'll go to panel two.
Nous sommes la coopérative Comidec, l'un des partenaires de la société MMR dans la production de produits sanitaires. 5 points importants qui nous ont aidé le système ici, c'est d'abord la levée des barrières illégaux, l'accompagnement des mesures sanitaires et sécuritaires, et aussi la participation au CLS et la dénonciation par les rapports d'incidents dans tous ces faits qui ne sont pas légaux. Merci.
Due to the ITSI program, that become one of our key elements in our channel, because MMR have created a compliance department that is just a focus on the traceability issues, the due diligence issues, and to build up a responsible chain. We come to understand that there are risks, and we have created the policies to mitigate those risks.
It has been our honor to be one of the first adopters of the ITSKI program and work hand in hand to continue to increase transparency and build trusting relationships with artisanal diggers, our buyers, governments, and all stakeholders.
Je m'appelle Vincent, je suis actuellement le chargé de programme ITSKI en RDC basé à Goma.
I'm in charge of the ITSKI program and I work
d'abord en qualité de conseiller technique avant d'assurer la commande de chef de projet au nord et sud Kivu, puis au Grand Katanga. J'ai aussi participé
I'm in charge in the Katanga region to implement the project.
Et du lancement de ces projets au Rwanda et au Burundi. Selon moi,
I'm also supervising the implementation of the project in Rwanda and Burundi. What I've noticed in the implementation of the ITSKI program is the traceability measures that have been in place. And we've been able to respond to the major risks. For example, from the local databases to the management processes, we have improved traceability. We've also had consultation measures. So we employ most of the workforce in DRC. So we've been able to frame our workforce and tackle the problems of armed conflict to ensure continuity on the market and ensure that families have.
Malgré tout, certains défis subsistent, dont les plus importants sont l'appropriation effective du projet. Les services du ministère des Mines et du gouvernement ont besoin de plus de ressources, de mauvaises conditions d'hygiène et de santé à la mine, un faible potentiel des EA et la nécessité d'une approche plus réaliste pour certaines questions telles que le travail de femmes et des enfants à la mine.
Mon nom est Jacques Mouillou. Je suis coordonnateur des activités de terrain du projet ITSI au Sud Kivu. Selon moi, ce qui a changé pour les 10 années.
So, for me, what has changed in the last 10 years here is that the 3 T's have been problematic due to armed groups, due to security forces that are not legitimate. There have been issues in terms of the channels of productions, both legal and illegal. Also, state service partners have not always the most responsible attitude. This can be problematic for diggers. It creates a lack of trust between the different partners. Terrible things have happened. Before, almost under mines were occupied. Diggers could not be satisfied with their revenue. Many services were impacting on their revenue. But once the project arrived, these diggers could be more personally satisfied with their revenues as well as their dependents. Production improved. There are challenges on site. There's more monitoring on a local level, especially the CLS and sub-CLS committees. There have been many changes, the decree was revised, new partners were thrown into the mix. This impacted on monitoring and recommendations and on recommendations. People were able to access more training as well so they could work better. Yes, my name is Mr. Muhimia. I work in the observatory. I represent civil society and the monitoring of mining activities. In North Kivu, there has been progress. Before the ITSKI project, sites were not qualified or authorized. Now today they are both qualified and authorized. And based on the qualification and the authorization, we can now begin the labeling process. Labeling is the second progress, the second advance that we've made. Labeling enables us to trace minerals from their origin all the way through the circuit, right up until the final buyer. And this is a huge advance. Also, based on the labeling, there's due diligence being carried out. This is done on 3 levels. On a state level, the state can be sure that the operators and its services are linked to good practices throughout the chain. Then operators, each operator is sure that it has a due diligence policy, and on site it is linked to the implementation of good practices. Then on the 3rd level, that is civil society. We also ensure that we are carrying out the proper monitoring and control for the good implementation of good practices, responsible practices, carried out by the different operators, as well as by governments. For us, this represents a great advance, and we are very happy with this.
Thank you to our teams for pulling that together, and thank you for the interpreters. I realize it was a little bit tricky to follow, just trying to make it work here. So just apologies on the sound, and we will circulate this so you will have a copy of it.
Well, thanks, Roper. That was a treat to get to hear all those people, and difficult to bring so many voices together for one panel, and you've done a great job. So we've heard a bit about what's happened in the last 10 years, some of the successes, some of the challenges. I think we're going to turn now to panel 2, which is about what's next. What's next for ITSKI? Where do we go? How can we improve? How can we address challenges that have been pointed out? And I think we're going to flip it. Michaela, you went last in the first panel, so we're going to let you go first this time. Do you have, and can you share with us any thoughts on how ITSKI can strengthen its system and ways to improve incident management?
Thanks, Gail. So yeah, looking at all the progress we've made over the last 10 years doesn't mean that we should stop making improvements. And in fact, we are continuously looking at what areas can be further improved, what can we do more efficiently, reevaluating that based on the achieved improvements on the ground. I name a few examples in different countries where we operate. In the DRC, what I can say is that we are looking at enhancing cooperation between the various provinces to look at ways for minerals to be transported and traded in a neighboring province in order to address logistical and financial challenges on the ground, or at how we could integrate new provinces in the program. In Rwanda, we are working towards closer cooperation between mining services and the police, for instance, to address issues of informal mining related to the lack of licenses. We're also working at promoting multi-stakeholder committees that have started to be set up in the country. And in Burundi, and this is a point that has been mentioned by some panelists, we are looking at reinstated the process of electronic data collection. This is about to resume actually in a couple of days and in the coming weeks, where we will continue with that process and hopefully we'll be able to expand to other countries after that. We can also look at, beyond OECD compliance. And I know, we hear on the ground and also at the international level, some expectations that go beyond OECD compliance. And I can name, there are many examples, but I will name one only. If we look at occupational health and safety, I believe that the experience, I hope to say past, but I will say the current experience of COVID has created some awareness about hygiene at mine sites. And I think there is an opportunity here to use this momentum and expand interventions around environmental issues connected to health and to mining. One concrete example is water management and water recycling. The absence of management of used polluted water can foster the spread of waterborne diseases at sites. So addressing this issue can benefit the health of miners and surrounding communities, but it can also at the same time have an additional benefit around the productivity and efficiency of miners who very much rely on water to wash their minerals and to increase their production. So this is a concrete example, but I'll end by saying that if we want to increase the resilience of mining communities, and therefore, if we are considering implementing associated activities that go beyond OECD, we need to keep the market engagement piece at the core. This is critical to ensure that we build something sustainable and that miners continue to have access to markets and that minerals are mined responsibly first. And therefore, it is primordial to say that such additional activities should not come at the expense of the core due diligence issue, which is ensuring that minerals are mined free from human rights abuses and from armed groups interference. Thank you.
Thank you for those thoughtful comments, Mikhail. Mikhail mentioned in passing a little bit electronics and how that's potentially helpful. Maybe turning to Quentin and then to you, Candy. Perhaps you can discuss your experiences with technology and the improvements that's made and maybe where you see things, the benefits of technology improving the process in the future.
Thanks, Gary. So like all systems can be improved. Like I said, we firmly believe that a tech-enabled progress could help this improvement process. So digitalization has to be considered and will definitely help to make the system improved. We are convinced about that. We're convinced about that, but we certainly want to insist that it cannot be done through removing people from the ground. And I want to echo what Michael just said. We have great respect for PACT because they are on the ground on a daily basis, helping us with our due diligence. We believe that we should rather look at softwares as a service for those people organizing the due diligence process on the ground, several sites, to make their daily lives and their daily business easier. We definitely believe that it will improve the system as a whole. So at NBM, to give our perspective, we have initiated a review by a third-party auditor to measure the impact that we create on the several stakeholders of our mine. And we try to include this digitalization topic in our review in order to help the ITSCI system to make progress. We realize that this is not for free, right? It comes with a cost. So now 10 years of partnership with ITSCI have made us also realize that the cost of the due diligence has been heavily put on our shoulders, okay? The cost burden of the proof of being responsible operators has been lying on the very upstream, like NBM. And we all know, the upstreams are made out of small and medium enterprises. We believe that the next step of digitalization will come with a cost and will also have to be done in parallel with a reflection on how the cost of due diligence is balanced on the whole supply chain. We believe that there is a continuous improvement process which is desperately needed in this system. And while we are considering this continuous improvement, we should be looking at spreading the value on a larger span of the supply chain. And I'm definitely thinking about the downstream side, where the companies are bigger in size and have funds to allocate. So we are following the latest discussions now at the OECD with great interest. And I think the OECD is doing a fantastic job in coordinating that discussion. We believe that they have been at the core of responsible mineral supply. They must be at the core of the next step as well.
Thank you so much, Quentin. That's terrific. Turning to Candy, if you'd like to follow up with the technology, that would be super.
Sure. Thank you very much, Gail. So I think that, ITSE has been very responsive to needs, but it does need to continue to change. Nothing stands still, everything is evolving. The opportunity is that ITSE has found a way to make it work for the 3 Ts in the Great Lakes region. ITSE is road tested and it's proven to be best in class. So the lesson here is that ITSE needs to continue to be responsive. As we know, ESG and beyond compliance is increasingly core to how business is expected to operate. So I feel that now really is the time for that transition, that progression of ITSE onto something else. And from my point of view, ITSE should build on their success by embracing new technologies such as blockchain. And I think these new technologies would help them to configure a program for different geographics and different levels of reporting, which include non-Kara regions. So the technology would probably enable them to expand their scope from 3 Ts and into other minerals and other materials, which are probably used within similar supply chains as well, and to cover all of those ESG risks that increasingly companies are expected to report on. That's to build on what they have already, best in class of what they have already, and to sort of design new layers of reporting that fit these new requirements, especially ESG. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, again, we're looking at the future. We've been operating in some select countries in the past 10 years. Are there any additional countries we could move into? Are there any additional regions that we should be thinking of? Maybe Ben, if you'd care to address that a little bit, we'd welcome your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. Before moving outside the region, I'll just continue in the Great Lakes region for a minute.
Sure.
I think if we were to answer the question now, how are the conditions in DRC mining communities satisfactory now? Answer is probably not yet. I think we need to be clear on this. So but conscious of also what Mikael said earlier about its key mandate, what the OECD guidance is. I think the question is not only what ITSC has been doing and has it been and what progress can be made. I think this is an important question, but another question is what type of leverage can be made. I think on ITSC and I'd like to address 2 points on this. One is qualitative. I think there is there's a big opportunity to leverage everything that ITSC has been doing over the years in terms of data, in terms of networks, in terms of stakeholders for wider development efforts. But so there's still a lot of issues to address. And I think there is a question to many stakeholders here that would be good continuing to be part of the conversation. Another dimension, addressing more your question, Gary, is about the quantitative expansion or leverage that can be done on the ITSC program. And I think this is true in the DRC still. There's still areas to be open, even more remote than the ones currently opened. This is true in the Chopo province, in the north of Maniema and South Kivu as well. So I think there's more areas to access and minerals to access the market and benefiting the DRC communities. And this might be also helping addressing some existing issues and barriers. The more sites, we know this, the more sites open, the less incentives for price discrepancy or smuggling there are. So I think this is something to be bear in mind continuously. And so maybe to address your question a bit more directly, Gary, there also are other areas internationally that I think could leverage ITSC's experience in the Great Lakes region. I think one can name probably Nigeria. I'm sticking to 3T production here, as well as Myanmar. So there is, my big message here is there is the huge systems, processes, network stakeholders to leverage on. And I think this is for the next step something to bear in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. I agree very much with the points that you've made. Maybe drilling down a little bit, Dharam, what do you think, and do you have any comments on a potential expansion into Nigeria, for example?
Yes, thank you, Gert. So yes, expansion to other regions considered high risk today, in this case, Nigeria. The presence of an industry-wide tried and tested program would really better the acceptance of said material into global markets, whilst very importantly bringing the inherent cost efficiencies by blocking exposure to large and unsustainable costs in carrying out proprietary audits and reports on certain artisanal sites where business may not support these associated costs. So really having such a program, which is already working in region in Central Africa, trying to expand it whilst also taking into account the local culture, the local workings and development in Nigerian artisanal sites would really be beneficial and would actually possibly increase the acceptance and benefit downstream users as to why they should accept material from that region more frequently also. Moving slightly away from that and slightly back towards Central Africa, where ITSC holds a significant amount of data. So developing data collection and processing to further empower local upstream stakeholders to take the due diligence activities more into their own hands would allow further expansion for the program by means of perhaps more site validations. As Mikhail mentioned, many of the sites where PACT are going to validate are extremely far remote areas. So this would be particularly beneficial there, which in turn would contribute to the economic development of the mining subsectors being operated in. But to just wrap off on my side, due diligence is very much an active process, and therefore I feel that inherently the program will continue to develop in line with the market as it has done so over the past 10 years so successfully. And it will be very interesting to see where we are in another 10 years from now and perhaps discussing a whole bunch of other points. Thanks, Gare.
Thank you, Dharam. Yeah, we have a couple minutes left on this panel. I'd open it up a little bit for anyone who'd like to jump in, any of the panelists, to discuss the ways that blockchain might be used more efficiently in the coming decade, or if you disagree and think blockchain shouldn't and can't be used more efficiently. Would anyone like to comment on that as in the thinking ahead?
Yes, hi, Gary. I'll just say a few things about that. I think blockchain is very much the question of the moment. It's very much, from being a sort of technology that nobody much paid attention to now being very much in focus. But I think blockchain by itself will not solve any problems or indeed produce any solutions as far as due diligence and traceability is concerned. It has to be a combined effort, blockchain and on the ground reporting and operatives to ensure the verification of the information coming into the blockchain system. However, as we know, blockchain has the ability to really source or verify information going in once that information has been verified as accurate. So it's capable of creating multi-levels of information, which means that it could cope with CORA regions and ESG requirements at different levels all at one time and all in one space. Thank you.
That's very helpful. And I think all of the answers and all of the panelists seem to circle back that technology may provide an important benefits to us in moving forward in the next decade, but that really what's on the ground is what's key. And we're always going to need some boots on the ground. We're going to need people on the ground, their personalities and their individuals to deal with, whether it's government officials or sellers. So I think that was a very thoughtful point. I think what I'll do is there are a number of questions that have been coming in and we welcome those questions. As I said at the beginning, I don't know how many we'll be able to answer today, but I'm going to end this session a little bit early so that I can turn to Roper so that she can address a few of the questions that have come in and then we'll move into concluding remarks. But thank you all, very helpful comments in this panel. And Roper, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Garen. I appreciate all the timekeeping here, that we have a little bit of time at the end to make sure that we can include some questions from the audience. And again, just apologies if there have been any kind of technical hiccups as we've gone. Appreciate everyone kind of bearing with us. All part of the fun. So, I mean, I think some of the questions from the panelists are just around the costs of ITSC as well and how we're financed. So perhaps this is one for the panel as well, but also to acknowledge that this is part of the follow-on conversation, and it's an ongoing one that the OECD is doing a very good job of facilitating. We have a panel in the forum around the costs and values of due diligence. But as well around, I just want to address the question around from the participants around costs on mining communities. And Mikhail, if you don't mind as well, speaking from more of that on the ground perspective, I'd really appreciate maybe you coming in on that one as well. I think you're well placed to answer.
Thanks, Roper. Yeah, I can add a couple of comments about that. I mean, I think, as I said in a earlier part, I guess we don't want to exclude anyone on the ground, and looking at the cost is well, it's making sure first and foremost that every mind that desire to join the ITSC program, disregarding the size and the location, will have access to that site, disregarding the costs. And therefore, being a small or big mines will not play a role. This is also one of the strengths of ITSC and our teams on the ground, to adjust to the needs on the ground. And that cannot be included in a cost issue. If we look at the risks, we need to look at where the main risks are, and that's how we will also adjust our interventions on the ground, where more monitoring is needed, while in other areas with lower risks, then we could adjust and make sure that we don't need necessarily to do the same level of follow-up because these issues are lower. And this is an important factor regarding costs. And last but not least, obviously we talk about different countries and geographies. And I did touch upon some challenges that we face, the main challenges being logistical challenges, where we have long ways to access sites. The roads infrastructure does add another factor that creates costs that may not be existent in other areas where a better infrastructure is available.
Okay, thank you. And I think there was also a specific question, I'm multitasking here, so apologies guys, a question around just inclusion of mines in South Kivu. And you're I think, very well placed and on the ground there. Maybe you could just quickly comment on the validation of mines in South Kivu.
Yeah, thanks, Roper. So yes, the validation of mine sites in South Kivu, I think this has really increased over the past few years. Certainly, you can see that from the amount of material coming out of the province. We certainly feel as though there are many more negotiants, many more upstream actors who are very active and regularly producing material. And this has only been possible due to the increased validation, and particularly in Shabunda, in more remote areas where the program has gone and validated these sites. So we do feel that that this is particularly tangible there, and the amount of material that is possibly leading through parallel channels definitely looks like it has decreased.
Thank you. So we're coming up to the end of our time, and I believe we've answered some of the questions that have come in. Maybe I will just turn now to some final reflections on looking forward, and just to say we continue to welcome questions and comments. You can share them now in the chat, or obviously you got my contact details now, so please do feel free to follow up with ITSC. And reflecting on quite a lot that's been covered in the panel discussions, I think for me, coming in as program manager to ITSC, and really kind of listening to everything that has been said and thinking about the way forward from here, there's a real richness of experience that we've only begun to unpack on this panel, and really look forward to continuing to find ways to do that, and hopefully have some in-person discussions as well, not before too long. And what I've heard is that we've really been tested in the region, road tested. It's not always been easy, and we've worked out how, we've worked things out as we go. But this has really been done in collaboration and with an inclusivity model, both in terms of how we include mine sites, and Mikhail, you touched on this around small and large, remote as well, and Dharm, you're speaking around inclusion of more sites in South Kivu. So that's a critical point that I've heard, as well as looking to the importance of including industry. And we do that as ITSC, as a member association, and that is also critical to our sustainability and our financial model. And I think that should be noted and considered, and also considered in how we move forward, working with prioritizing our members and prioritizing mining communities on the ground, and looking at the resources that we do have available, and ensuring that we're making kind of best and most strategic use of them. Technology has come up. Gary, you mentioned this as well, so I don't need to belabor the point, I don't think, but it is clear that 2021, we need to consider how data development continues. So this is a process of continuous improvement. And how we integrate this with people and with the current way, recognizing that it is about boots on the ground, particularly when it comes to risk management and incident management, and following up on issues where having local networks and capacity is critical. So lots to consider as we move forward, and really appreciate everyone's views and a bit of excitement and ways that new things that we can consider. I will just I think end it there and recognize that our panel has been very supportive, and it's this multi-stakeholder approach with our government partners, our industry partners, and our civil society partners in order to move forward. And I will just hand it back over to Gare there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Roper, and thank you, panelists. In conclusion, it seems that there's unanimity among all the panelists. I think most of the people on that ITSC has come a long way in the past decade. There's also unanimity that there's a lot of opportunities and ways for growth in different directions moving ahead. So it's an exciting time as we move forward. I know that Roper has addressed some of the questions that came in chat. I suspect there's some others that have come in more recently that we haven't addressed yet. Rest assured, someone will get back to you. We want to make sure we get back to everybody who comes in. I also understand some people had trouble dialing in. If these were your friends, please remind them that this is being recorded today. We're happy to share this recording with them. Sorry if there were technical snafus, but they can see all of this and hear all of this with the recording. With that, I'd like to thank our audience. You've been great. Thank you for your input, your questions, and for joining us. I look forward to continuing the discussion. As Roper said, this is a process of continuous improvement. And I look forward to moderating 20 years out in 2031, looking back on 20 years and what we achieved in that time period. Until then, I hope you'll join me in giving the panelists a hand of applause for all that they've done. And I would say to everyone, good day for those of you early in your day, and good night for those of you joining us in the evening. Thank you.